Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy and Nate. And today, this is going to be a bit more of a long-term discussion, a forecast for the severe weather events towards the latter stages of the week, as well as into next week. A lot of active severe weather I foresee here, as we've been talking about here on this channel for quite some time. And I can officially say that we are really starting to get into that active May severe weather pattern. So if you guys are new to my channel, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family on social media. Also follow me on social medias. I almost butchered that. And yeah, that's basically it. Also, actually, not basically it. One more thing. If Friday does turn out to be as bad as the Euro says it will be, then I'm probably going to live stream. The GFS is really holding back on the event on Friday, although it is starting to uptrend, especially with the low-level jet and how there could be a lot more moisture return. And we'll get into that later on in the video, but I could potentially be live streaming on Friday, so watch out for that. Alright, let's take a look at the Storm Prediction Center here. This is one thing that we take a look at the beginning of every single video, just to see what the professionals have with their ideas as to what could be happening here. And so we have our marginal risk here for Florida here on day one. This is the end of our stationary boundary that is holding all this moisture in place within the Gulf of Mexico. This is what we've been seeing over the past week and a half. And so with this marginal risk here, this is where your stationary boundary would be, and a lot of those thunderstorms are really channeled into places like Central Florida. So Tampa, Orlando, Port St. Lucie, some of those areas, even further south of that towards Lake Okeechobee, you guys could be potentially be seeing some severe weather. You know, a 1 out of 5 on the severe weather scale, but something that to not scoff at. Wind, hail. I've got notifications because I've actually got a landscaper coming to my house. So if you guys hear the bloop, 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 boop, just know that I've got my notifications on for a reason. But wind and hail here are in the 5% vicinity. It's the these very small latter end of the spectrum. But for hail, you have a 5% chance of seeing 1-inch size hail or larger within 25 miles of a point. For wind, you have 5% chance of seeing wind gusts over 58 miles per hour within 25 miles of a point. So that is indicated in your brown right here. And they're both practically the same size. You know, the wind and hail don't differentiate in size at all, so practically the same areas that I mentioned are going to get severe weather. Still small chance, and then you also have your tornado risk, which is a 2% today, unlike what it was yesterday, which was actually a 0% chance, or it wasn't really a 0% chance, but it just wasn't designated by the Storm Prediction Center. And so definitely a higher risk for tornadoes here today than it was before. Then you also have your Day 2 outlook. This is the threat for severe weather to potentially linger into places like the mid-Atlantic as well as the Northeast before the major snowstorm comes through, which I'm sure most of you have heard of from other channels. I haven't been talking about it a whole lot because I've been more focused on the severe weather spectrum and how that could be more impactful than the winter weather for the most part. But as of right now, you have your marginal risk right here, which is along places near Virginia Beach all the way up to the Delmarva vicinity into places of New York like Albany. And so if you guys live over there, there isn't really a whole lot to say besides a 5% chance for wind. If we go over to the hail, it says less than 5%. If we go over to the tornado, it's less than 2%. So it's kind of really on the border of the cool air and the warm air, and there's not enough warm air to advect from the Gulf Stream, which rides along the eastern coast, for there to be enough organization for there to be some big severe weather, especially with how that stationary boundary just started to move off from Florida to allow moisture return into the United States. So something that is really to note here with this event, that it's mainly going to be more or less a wind threat. can't rule out the potential for a tornado, but I don't foresee it at all. Day 3, nothing really happening. A lot of prefrontal convection, mainly before the next storm comes through, which will be on Friday. So this is the Thursday outlook here for day 3. As I said, a lot of general thunderstorms, so nothing really to talk about there. Day 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. You have your 15%, which is indicated as a slight risk if it was under normal circumstances, but it's not, so it's on the different weather outlook. And you have your 15% chance for severe storms. That will be mainly into places like Oklahoma, all the way down into Texas, into Louisiana and Mississippi. Personally, I think Oklahoma could be cut out of this risk because of how much of a limiting factor there is in place up there. But this is still something that we're going to want to continue to watch because we are still a couple days out, and that models could, differ as time moves along. But you'll see later on in the video, if you guys are willing to stay for that long, you'll see the reason as to why I think there isn't really going to be a whole lot happening in Oklahoma, and how places like near Atlanta and San Antonio could potentially still see some severe weather. Dallas-Fort Worth is kind of half and half. I'm actually really, I'm really torn between whether or not they're going to see severe weather or not. I think they could, but it's very much so something that I'm going to have to continue to watch for trends as things continue to move along. And then, of course, just some scattered showers and maybe even some severe storms that'll happen into places like Louisiana and Mississippi. Some could very well be severe, which is the reason why they indicated a 15%. And so that's more or less, I think, something to where into the morning hours, the early morning hours of Saturday, that's when things are really going to start to fire up. And speaking of Saturday, here is your other 15%, which has been issued basically in the deep south all the way into the northern parts of the Florida vicinity. So Tallahassee, heading all the way up into the southern parts of Georgia, heading into the southern parts of Alabama and Mississippi to the northeastern. Well, actually, I'll just say the eastern parts of Louisiana. So this yellow indicates 15% chance for severe storms, and that's definitely something that we're going to want to monitor. Another thing that I want to note here real quickly is that there is the potential for a severe weather event to happen next week as well, and the Storm Prediction Center actually sees that as a potential chance for an upgrade within the day 7 and 8 outlook that could be issued tomorrow. So just something to really to read into real quickly. Deterministic medium range guidance is in surprisingly good agreement in depicting another upper trough ejecting from the western continental U.S. across the plains around day 7 Monday into day 8 Tuesday. Substantial low-level moisture return may occur ahead of this feature across a part of the southern plains. Assuming sufficient low-level moisture does indeed materialize, then the presence of steep mid-level lapse rates and favorable timing of the ejecting upper trough suggests an organized severe risk may develop on Tuesday across some portion of Oklahoma and Texas. A 15% severe area may need to be introduced for the next Tuesday as soon as the next outlook update if run-to-run model consistency continues, which in my opinion, I think it very well is going to continue. I actually have some very high confidence in the potential of a severe weather event to happen next week. Tuesday and Wednesday, guys, I would really monitor that, and I would not be surprised if they issued a 15% for that Tuesday, which it'll be day 7 tomorrow, so we'll have to continue to look at it. But day 8 on Wednesday, for that Wednesday as well, could potentially see a 15% as well, because that 2-day span is looking really nice, and I'll show you guys why in a bit. For right now, let's take a look at the GFS. This is wide scale. We're looking at the giant whole look at the 48 states here in the United States. Alaska and Hawaii, I'm sorry, you guys just can't fit. So, no offense to people who live over there that are watching my channel. We're just looking at the main continental U.S. Here for today. So, you can see your low pressure system, which is supposed to bring your snowstorms here, your historical snowstorm because of how late it is in April. So your lingering snow will still be here in Kansas and Missouri that's still happening on today. You're also going to have more snow that's going to happen a bit closer towards the Ohio River Valley into the northeast. So you can see as time moves along here on Tuesday, which, by the way, if you guys want to follow along, up here is the time here in Eastern Daylight Time. So if you're in Central, you subtract 1 hour. If you're in Mountain Daylight Time, you subtract 2 hours. So if you want to follow along, you can stare at that time the entire time. So your snowstorms start to move through the southern parts of the Midwest into the Ohio River Valley late tonight into tomorrow. You can see how Wednesday morning it really starts to materialize, and you have a lot of this mixed isolated precip here on in the northern parts of Pennsylvania, north central parts of Pennsylvania, in places like Cleveland and Pittsburgh, Buffalo. You guys could even see some snow showers, and even Columbus, some lingering showers could be there. But if you're in like places like Baltimore and Washington, you guys know the drill already. We don't get snow. So why are you even asking this question? It's the truth. As long as I've lived over here in the mid-Atlantic, those areas and my area has not been able to get any snow, although we were pretty lucky to get it in instances like December and January. But February, March, April, even last year's snow event wasn't as active as this year. So you can still see here your snow still continues to move on through. One thing that I want to note real quickly is that this low pressure is really far inland. If it wasn't this far inland, I would be talking a bit more about how there could be a very much so widespread snow event here. But because the low pressure system is a bit further inland, your warm air, if there was anything of that sort already, because you can see that stationary boundary right here that I was talking about is still in place by Wednesday, but it's just not too strong. If there was any warm air to escape into this, this would relatively warm up the atmosphere and create your severe weather risk, which the Storm Prediction Center indicated on day 2 for Wednesday. But if the low pressure system was a lot further off to the coast, your cold air would then seep into places a lot more widespread. And so then we would be talking about a bit more of a widespread snowstorm here. But because the low pressure system is a bit more over land, we can anticipate that it'll be more or less localized to areas in the extreme western and northern parts of the states in the Northeast. So definitely something I wanted to mention with all of that. Let's talk about real quickly the total snowfall amounts here with this system. You can see a massive area of snow here indicated by the GFS, with some areas getting from 1 to 3 inches, maybe even 3 to 5 in some areas near St. Louis, heading off into central parts of Illinois. Then you also have areas that could be from 5 to 8 inches in northern parts of Indiana into northern parts of Ohio into New York and the northern parts of Vermont and New Hampshire into Maine. So definitely something that we're going to want to watch here as this continues to unfold around us. There's another notification. You'll hear when someone rings on my doorbell, hopefully, maybe not. Or else people are going to think I'm crazy for keeping notifications on during a video. But yeah, as I said, widespread account for severe weather, well, not severe weather, snow here, that could be in place within this next low pressure system. And so as that moves along, you'll see some areas that can get up to almost even a foot indicated in these pinks. That'll be on the later parts or the latter parts end of the storm on like Thursday and stuff like that, to when you'll get your full total amounts. So just something I wanted to go over real quickly. Let's go back over here to the GFS, the widespread here, and this is Thursday. Thursday is kind of our calm before the storm a little bit. You guys remember our day 3 outlook in which I talked about a lot of this prefrontal convection that could occur prior to the low actually taking shape. And so here is our new low pressure that is forming right within here. You have your scattered thunderstorms that are occurring because of the moisture return that is being brought up by the warm front. And so it's something that we're really watching closely as this continues to move on through. As I said, this isn't really supposed to materialize until Friday, which if we take a look, sorry, let's close that slide. If we take a look through here, here is Friday for us. Our low pressure system starts to get really well organized. You have your cold air that's seeping in behind, which can bring some lingering snow showers for higher elevations in the Rockies. But this is your giant area for severe weather right within here. And you notice how some of the darker greens down are into places like Texas and Louisiana, and some of the lighter greens are over here in Oklahoma. And I'll actually show you guys as to why that is a bit later, but that's also mainly the reason as to why I'm kind of favoring places like Austin, Texas, places like San Antonio for some severe weather, maybe even Houston. Houston could join the fray as well with the amount of energy that's with this storm. So that's definitely something that we're going to want to watch. But, you know, storms really don't start to become, really couldn't hint for storms all too much until it starts to get into the 10, 11 o'clock hours. That's when things could really start to kind of bubble up. And as that continues to progress, then you'll start to see more and more severe storms. As I said, Texas, I'm really favoring here for the biggest severe potential, but that's just based off of me looking at the models as of right now. Our dew points here within this area, relatively moist here according to the GFS. You have a lot of moisture here in Texas. There is some that's starting to seep into Oklahoma. As I said, the GFS is really starting to uptrend in regards to a low-level jet that could be advecting some of this moisture here towards the surface. Not as much as the Euro. The Euro is really aggressive with a low-level jet, and that's kind of the difference between two stories right now, with the GFS being relatively tame and the Euro being really aggressive with this model run. So one thing that we're going to want to continue to monitor as time moves along, as this low pressure moves on through. Very steep dry line here from this low pressure system, I will admit that much. And so how much this dry line will come into play here in Texas is really something that we're going to have to watch for the most part. But one thing that the Euro and the GFS do agree upon is that dry line and how and what will happen even after that. So here's the Euro. You can see how far north the moisture actually gets up, all the way into Oklahoma and even into parts of Kansas and Missouri as well as Arkansas. You can see also how moist places like Louisiana is, and it even isn't as moist in Louisiana according to the GFS. So the Euro is really being aggressive with this. I mean, this is a very, very aggressive showing from the Euro model, which typically doesn't do this. So this is something that we're going to really want to watch out for the most part. The GFS is a bit cold bias, as most models typically are, but this is something that is really interesting to really watch out for as we get closer and closer. But another thing that the Euro and GFS do agree upon is what the low pressure does after the event. And you can see how, as this continues to move on forward, your moisture does start to wrap around the actual low pressure in itself. The warm front actually becomes a bit more tilted to the northeast now. And so a lot of this moisture starts to seep in behind the low pressure system. And that is something that we're really going to have to watch out for. The potential for some upscale type storms that could be forming on the northern end. Very weak storms, I will say that much, but that is something that we're going to have to make a note of as to how the low pressure system really starts to kind of churn itself and wrap around most of the moisture as the low pressure continues to head off towards the south and east. So that is something that we're going to have to watch out for with this as this progresses. But one thing that I do want to look at here, we'll take a look at 21Z and we'll take a look at severe weather. Surface-based CAPE, for the most part, according to both models, is not bad, actually. You have some amounts. Excuse me. I don't really know. I really need to start putting my allergy medicine and stuff. I really need to start taking that. But moisture for the most part, or the energy for the most part, isn't really that much of an issue here in Texas. You can see some areas. This is the convective available potential energy, the buoyant force in the atmosphere, the displacement between warm air rising and cold air sinking. So the more displacement between the two indicates the more unstable energy in the atmosphere, or the convective available potential energy. So the more CAPE, stronger the storms typically are. And so around 2000, maybe even above that, is when you can start to consider strong storms. So some of these yellows, you can see it start to get around 2000 joules per kilogram, which if it's around that, it should be relatively fine, in my honest opinion, for, strong storms. But you can see down here in the southern parts of the state, heading off into places like Austin. Austin might be a little bit too far north, but San Antonio, as I've mentioned, right in this general vicinity, you have a lot of energy that is in place. Both models do agree upon that. You can even see here on the Euro that some areas even get into the red, and the red indicates actually above 3,000 joules per kilogram. So you might even have some stronger amounts of CAPE within that part of the storm. And even heading off into the 7 o'clock hours here, you can see how the CAPE amounts actually increase in some areas. They also increase further north, so places near Abilene could also get in and join the fray as well. And both models do agree that the amount of energy actually does increase along the dry line. So whether or not storms actually do form along the dry line is a good question. But one thing that I can say for sure with high confidence is that if you're on the southern part of the state near San Antonio, heading up into Austin, and maybe even further north, and so places like Llano, maybe San Saba, and Brownwood, you guys could potentially see some severe weather as well. I have really high confidence with this. I'm really confident with areas, especially around San Antonio. So I definitely monitor this system as this continues to move on through closer and closer within your time frame. Next, we're going to take a look at the wind shear here. And I said this video is practically going to be a bit longer, so bear with me, because we are going to want to, this is what we do on this channel. We do in-depth analysis. You have other channels that do, this general, say, hey, storm's moving on through, whatever. I like to show my work, and most people who watch me know that I like to show my work and why I believe what I believe. And so, once we get closer to storms, then people will start to realize that I tend to shift towards, SPC outlook and then timings. And so now, because we don't exactly have a pinpoint, accurate thing to say exactly about the timings and how in depth they could be, we're just basically going over the conditions and what we can expect from this according to the models so far. So just by looking at this, a lot of energy so far. That's one thing we can check out for the most part, especially southern parts of Texas. But wind shear here, we'll take a look at the 500 millibar wind shear, which is the mid-levels of the atmosphere. You need over 40 knots of wind shear at the 500 millibar vicinity in order for you to consider strong, severe storms. Maybe some could be strong. But around 40 knots of wind shear is what I would expect. And around some of these areas, you can see some of these pinks actually go up to 50, maybe even 55 knots. So your wind shear here at the 500 millibar vicinity is a bit stronger. And the Euro actually agrees. But this is one thing here that I wanted to talk about, which is the 850 millibar height. This is the low-level jet, which is around, 2 kilometers up in the sky? 1 kilometer up in the sky. I'm sorry. And so 850 millibars is around 1 kilometer up in the sky. 500 millibars is just below 6 kilometers. But, one thing I wanted to make a note of is how the Euro really is aggressive. Well, I guess the Euro's not going to be aggressive for me anymore because this model run's just not going to load. So the Euro is really aggressive with its moisture return and how the low-level jet really starts to crank and become really expansive over the overnight hours of Thursday into Friday. You can see how massive this actually becomes and how the general direction of the winds coming from the south moving to the north is really going to start pushing up most of that moisture. And so that stays into play all the way throughout the day until the afternoon hours when things start to subside, which that's typically when it starts to subside, but then it'll start to increase again into the overnight hours. And you can actually see that into places like Louisiana, to where there could be a lot of moisture return within there. And we'll talk about the energy over there in a bit, but you can see even with the low-level jet in the overnight hours into places like Mississippi, that actually gets really intense. Whenever you see yellows here, according to Pivotal Weather, and even dark yellows, that's when your low-level jet can actually get really intense. And so 71 knots, pretty strong for the most part, and it does get really aggressive as this low-pressure system moves on through, and could potentially create some strong, severe weather on Saturday. So definitely something that we're going to have to monitor for the most part. Another thing that we're going to want to look at is, and this is going to get really complex for people who don't understand what's going on, but we're going to take a look at the supercell composite. This basically takes a look at the areas where supercells are more favorable. If there wasn't any limiting factors such as capping inversion, or cap that we like to say. So you can see 3 areas here that I'm watching. First off, you have the triple point, which is the northern part into Oklahoma. It says there's a lot over here, and if you guys remember earlier on in my video, I said there wasn't really going to be a whole lot of stuff that was going to be happening in Oklahoma. You guys might be looking at me strange by seeing that the potential for supercells is decent, actually higher than most spots in in Oklahoma. So you guys must be wondering, am I crazy? Whatever. So we'll get into that in a second. We have another area here, which is just north of Llano in Texas, and we have another area here, which is in the general vicinity of San Antonio, maybe a bit further south of San Antonio, but right around San Antonio, maybe along the I-37 corridor, a little bit further south. That's definitely an area that I'm watching. So let's break down this event in 3 different categories: north, central, south. So let's take a look at the north first, because a lot of you must be wondering, what is my issue? Looking at the sounding in itself, it looks pretty good except for one thing. So we'll get through the stuff that looks good first, which we'll start with a hodograph. So if you can imagine yourself launching a weather balloon and tracking it with your radar, this would be the track right here. So if I zoom into this hodograph right here, you can see how your thing starts right here. This is 0 kilometers, 1 kilometers, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers. You can assume what the rest of the numbers mean. But as this starts out, as it goes higher and higher up in the atmosphere, the winds start to come from the south, and they move off to winds coming from the west. And so that'll move it east, and that is when you have this general arcing, this curling off to the right. So whenever you see this where it starts to curl off to the right here within this red line, the 0 to 3 kilometers vicinity, that's when it is indicative of some really good veering and the potential for supercellular characteristics, even tornadic characteristics. So that actually checks out here for us. Maybe a bit of a high precipitation based storm if you're approaching it from the east, but very strong right mover if it does root itself with this. If you're on the southern edge of the storm, you guys are going to have a really good view of this of the cell on the southern side. Just don't get smacked by the rear flank downdraft. That would be great for those chasers and stuff like that. Then we move off to the energy aspect of this. You can see our red line here, which is indicative of temperatures with height. Your green line right here, which is indicative of dew points with height. And your dotted line right here, which is indicative of what a thunderstorm would take if it were developing, and it would grow into maturity. So we call that the developing parcel line, just to sound smart and stuff like that. So anything in between the red line and the dotted line, if the red line's on the left side and the dotted line's on the right side, that is your cape. Fun fact. That is your energy, and there's a plethora amount of energy here with this, according to the GFS. But there's always an opposite to energy, and that is negative energy, a limiting factor, if you will. And that is called capping inversion. It's this thing right here. Whenever the temperature line goes to the right of the dotted line, that's when you have a capping inversion. If you think of it this way, and I'll go full screen here for you all. Here's a water bottle, all right? Looks like a plain empty water bottle, but if you can imagine for me real quickly, a lot of energy that is being stored within this water bottle. So if I squeeze in this water bottle with the lid on, it won't pop. I can do as much as I want with it, you know, without using any external forces. The lid won't come off whatsoever. But if I loosen the lid a bit, then of course the lid will, well, energy will escape the lid, most likely will pop off. So, in some instances to where you actually have a decent amount of energy in place, that's actually, you know what, let's just use another water bottle because I twisted this a bunch. Where you have a lot of energy in place, you can have a lot of buildup, and your capping inversion could start to arc, which is the reason why if you take a look at the definition of Pileus caps on the internet, you can see how it starts to arc when thunderstorms start to form. And you can actually see that here as I continue to twist and twist this water bottle, representing the amount of energy that's going to try and force its way. You can see that the actual lid is starting to bulge. And that is our capping mechanism. So if our capping starts to get weaker and weaker, and we let go of the lid, boom, steam starts to come out, your energy starts to rise up through the storm, and that is when you can start to get your severe storms. That's not what I wanted to change to, my goodness. That's when you can start to get your explosive thunderstorms that can get very large, very dangerous, and so that is just what capping inversion does to thunderstorms. Something pretty interesting that I wanted to mention there. And so there is a plethora amount of capping here. Just by taking a look down here, you can see cape. And this area right within here, that indicates our cape. But this box right here, that is our capping inversion. And you typically want less than -60. If you get more than that, you can forget about it. No storms will form whatsoever. I'm guaranteeing you that. Unless if you have, like, so much energy here to the point where it's like in the 5,000, 6,000 joules per kilogram vicinity. If it's anything under that, forget about it. No storms will form. Take a look at this. Your capping inversion is -161. And it is very, very strong. Very strong limiting factor in place. So, I'll rephrase what I said earlier. I don't think storms will form. If they do form along that dry line, then expect some massive hail because this dry spike right here, this elevated mixing layer, EML, is really strong within some of these, you know, areas up north. Your lapse rates are also pretty high, so I would expect some large hail if storms were to form, but it's just very hard for these things to even sustain or even root itself. And so that's something that I did want to mention with this here in Oklahoma. All right, let's talk about the areas near Llano. So we'll take a sounding here. You can see the same thing with the hodograph is here, except it's not as wide. It's not as, you know, not as long of a hodograph. It still curls off to the right, but it also curls up to the north a bit too. And so that's something pretty interesting to note with this storm, that it is a bit weaker, but, you know, still have a tornadic hodograph right here, so that checks out. And so, yeah. That's pretty good with the wind shear on that accord. Your cape is pretty good. You don't have a lot of that overlapping with your capping inversion, and that indicates right here. You have -44, which could indicate some explosive development, so that's something to keep in mind. Cape is forecasted to be above 3,000 joules per kilogram, so that's another thing to watch out for. Your lapse rates are pretty good for the most part. So, you know, just by looking at this sounding here, tells me that there is some tornadic potential, especially with the wind shear and how the holograph does curl off, albeit a bit weaker. You know, not exactly my ideal holograph, but, you know, I've seen tornadoes form at worse conditions. So, Stuff could happen. You have a lot of energy. You definitely have a lot of energy for large hail. So large hail, would not be surprised if things fire off on that accord there. And then we'll talk about San Angelo here. San Antonio, I'm sorry. San Angelo is on the opposite side of the state. Well, not exactly opposite side. It's more or less further west. But San Antonio. San Antonio is looking really interesting for the most part. And I've been watching this for quite a while. I think a lot of people here in the general weather community are looking at that triple point, and they're like, oh, well, just because it's capped around the triple point, it means that the entire event is over. And I say, nay. That actually, if you just look at some of the other areas that could potentially fire off, you can find stuff like a good hodograph here. Just by looking at that actually looks absolutely beautiful. That's going to be amazing for storm spotting if people were there. Your shear is really good, actually. It's a lot wider than the hodograph that we last saw. Your lapse rates are really good. Your energy is pretty good. Your capping inversion is almost non-existent in some spots. And so San Antonio, I keep saying San Angelo. You know what? I'm just going to say Austin. Austin, right around those areas, you guys could potentially see some things. And that's really going to be something that we're going to want to watch out for, especially around San Antonio, as I've mentioned. But, south of Austin, near the San Antonio vicinity, I'm really watching that very closely. So just know I'm continuing to watch out here for you all. A lot of you guys might be looking at me to say, please end my suffering, end the video. I'm sorry. We're going to continue. Even though we're 37 minutes in, we still got other things to talk about. And I told you this was going to be a long video, so don't blame me. You signed up for this. Anyways, I'm sorry. Back here to Saturday. This is what it looks like here for the most part. A lot of moisture return here. That is a terrible color to use. A lot of moisture return here. Dew points in the 60s, almost into the 70s in some spots here in the deep south. And they actually do get into the 70s in some spots. So there's a lot of energy here within this system, within this area. I foresee some thunderstorms to begin to develop right within this general vicinity, more or less, kind of like what the Storm Prediction Center said. Maybe more or less towards southern parts of Alabama, southern parts of Georgia, into Florida. I am really confident that that could form within all of this. Your CAPE, convective available potential energy within this area. There's not a lot because, storms already used it. So, but before that, you had plethora amounts of energy along the coast. And so as that evected through, you had some areas that could really start to feed on that. And then you have more energy here in places like Louisiana and Mississippi that isn't really going to be used. So it just kind of withers away, if you will, because nighttime and how the sun isn't out to create all that energy. And so I personally think it'll be more or less localized within this area, and we have to take a look at this amount of energy, which there is some that get up to 2,000 joules per kilogram. So it isn't like exactly all too massive per se, but it is still something that we're going to have to really watch as this continues to move on through. All right, last but not least, we are going to talk about next week and why I think it's actually that bad. And for that, we are actually going to go back to our good old buddy, old pal, the GFS, and we're going to go on to pivotal weather because I feel like that actually represents this a whole lot better than Weather Bell. And we're going to take a look. So the time frame I'm talking about specifically is the 27th into the 28th. And here's the beginning of the 27th. This is the morning. Giant low pressure that forms here. I mean, this is a very low pressure, very low pressure. Low. Apple bottom jeans, low pressure with the fur, whatever you want to call it. This thing is massive. This thing is strong. And this is a very interesting scenario because this thing is negatively tilted, and negatively tilted troughs actually indicate a bit more of a tornadic or even severe potential within this within systems in the weather. So as this progresses, heading off into Tuesday, you can see large band of storms that form here, all the way from Nebraska down into Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas into Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri into Iowa. You guys could potentially be seeing some strong storms, and so this is definitely something we're really going to want to watch, and that actually will continue overnight into places like St. Louis, and then more storms will begin to form as this low pressure system actually rides through the country, and you get some more storms that could form along the line here in the southeast. And this is when things get really concerning even further, because on Wednesday, this is when some more storms can impact the deep south, and this is why I'm really concerned about. You have your first wave that comes on through here in Oklahoma, Kansas, that general vicinity, and it doesn't look as bad, in my honest opinion, as the deep south. The deep south always just has that very strong low-level jet, even though this is a very open trough here within this system, although it becomes very steep towards the end of the run. It's just some very strong conditions here for the most part within the storm. You can see the moisture return within this event is actually exponential. It gets into the 70s in most spots here in the actual run. This is Tuesday, and dew points actually go all the way up to the 60s, go all the way up to the warm front here in places like Minnesota and Wisconsin. So a widespread severe event here could be possible in the early to mid stages of next week. You also have a very steep dry line here, which will be pushing on through places like Oklahoma and Texas, which is the reason why most people are concerned. You also have dews that are almost in the mid 60s here in the deep south. As that progresses into Wednesday, as I said, this area is going to be really moist for the most part, and along this cold front, would not be surprised for some widespread severe storms. But right in here in the deep south, I'm pretty concerned about. And actually, if I take a sounding here, this will actually be a good example as to what I mean by a strong for some of these areas. I'll actually go down here to the southeast. We can actually take a look at what I mean by strong here, and take a look at this. This is on Tuesday here, which is on this is in Louisiana. You can see the photograph. It veers quite a bit, maybe not as much from the 0 to 1 kilometer, but have some very strong shear here within this. And then if we go on to Wednesday here, we can take a look and see, look at this. It really starts to ramp up because of that energy, and you actually have a really good photograph here for the most part within this storm. Your energy is there, your wind shear is there, there is no capping inversion. That basically checks off the list of the potential for severe weather, but I will mention this, okay? We are a week away, so anything can happen with the models. This could easily change, and who knows? I might be talking out of my mind, and we potentially won't see anything next week. But for the Storm Prediction Center to mention that there could be something happening within this time frame is really concerning to me, and that's definitely something that we're going to want to monitor with the utmost respect. Alright guys, I know this was a long video, so I'll make the ending short. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did like it, please be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family. I do live streams on these events, so if you want to stick around for that, please do so. And yeah, thanks you guys so much for watching. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.